In this video, we are going to have a look at React.PureComponent. So till now, we have seen that all the class components inherit from React.Component. But there is also a React.PureComponent. Okay, and classes can class components can also be created by inheriting from React.PureComponent. Now, what is the difference between a class component created by inheriting from React.PureComponent and another one which is created by inheriting from React.Component? See, the difference is that React.Component renders every time. Like, it does not see that whether you are setting the same set state value or same prop. It does not see every time whenever it seems fit. This component created from a React.Component re-renders. But React.PureComponent is used as a optimization strategy where if your props and state are not changing, then it does not re-render. Okay. Now there is a small caveat here. This is not as simple as like simply it is changing or not changing. There is something called shallow comparison, which I will go in the later part of this video. But right now, for simplicity, I'm just saying that you think that if my props and state are not changing, then React.PureComponent is not going to re-render. Okay, and by that what I mean, let's say right now let's say count is state.count is 0. Okay, now let's say I do this dot set state and again I set count to again 0. So earlier also it was 0, now also it is 0. So there should not be any change in the UI, right? So for example, here you can see that there is a component where just like there is a whatever text is passed, which is the name, and whatever some count variable is there, right? That thing is passed. So both things, the name and the count currently is 0, so both are printed. And after that, if I click on change name, then this prop is like changing from outside, which means that from outside whatever the prop is being passed, that thing is changing. Then this internal component rendered item can change, or it can change by changing the state, which means that let's say whatever this count value is there, right? That count value I'm changing by clicking a button. So if I click a button, then let's say this count variable is incremented. Okay, so when I click here, then it is changing, right? So in essence, what is happening that when you click this button, then internal state is changing, and when you click this button, then essentially the external prop which is being passed, that is being changed. So these two states and props, these are the basic things which we are going to focus, and that's why these are the two buttons which using which we can change these things. Okay, now let's see what is the difference. See, so right now you can see that every time it is incrementing, so there will not be any difference. So let's say 5 6 7 8, every time it is changing, so every time it is re-rendering, it is not. So what do you mean by re-rendering? Just print here, so let's say re-render. Okay, so you can see that initially first time it rendered, that is fine. After that, when I whether it's click on this or click on this, every time it is re-rendering. Okay, so at this point of time, there is no difference between React pure component and React.Component. The difference starts coming when there is something like that the previous state and for example previous state and current state is same, or previous prop and current prop is same, and then React thinks that as an optimization strategy, since UI, so let's say right now it is 6, again you do this dot set state 6, then React knows that UI is not going to change, so why should I re-render? Okay, but this optimization strategy is not available by default. By default means you can see that if simply you are using React dot component, then let's say every time you are setting the same value means let's say whatever the count earlier was there, you are setting the same thing. So you can see that what is happening is that it is 0. When I'm clicking, then again 0 is only set. but then also you see that re-render is printed. So even if I keep on printing, keep on clicking, then you can see that even if state is not changing, then also this is being rendered, and the same thing will happen. So for example, if you see here that let's say I'm passing Alex, Bob and Charlie. Let's say I have another Bob here. So after Bob, another Bob is coming. Okay, so you can see that it is Alex, that is fine. If I click once, then it is Bob and it has re-rendered, that is expected. Now if I again click, then you can see that it is Bob, and again now it is also Bob, but then also it has re-rendered. So this Bob has not changed, same prop, right? But still it has re-rendered. So this sort of optimization is not available by default on normal React.component. But now let's do something like this, React.PureComponent. And now let's start. So right now you can see that it is 0. Okay, so first time it has rendered, that is fine. After that you can see that I can keep on clicking here, but nothing is being re-rendered because we are using React.PureComponent rather than React component, which is optimizing this thing, that it is seeing that you are not changing anything, right? So why should I re-render? Again here also, if you see that if I click once, then Alex has changed to Bob. Then even if it is a pure component, there is a change in state or prop, right? And that's why it has re-rendered. So re-rendered, right? But if I again click, then you see that it has not re-rendered because Bob has not changed. Bob still has been Bob only, because after Bob there is a repeat in this Bob name passed. Okay, but again if I click, then if Bob becomes Charlie, then now there is a change. So you see the difference, right? And now it has re-rendered. You see the difference that React.PureComponent optimizes in this fashion that whenever there is a change, then only it is re-rendering, otherwise it is not re-rendering. We can make the example slightly more complicated by using something like this, that let's say rather than setting 0 to 0 again, let's say I'm incrementing it, but I'm not incrementing it infinitely. I'm incrementing it, let's say, only till count is less than 3. Once it becomes 3, then after that I stop incrementing and I'm setting the same value. Okay, which means that 0 will become 1, 1 will become 2, 2 will become 3, and then after 3 it will remain 3, because once it is 3, then count less than 3 is false, and then it is setting it to 3 only every time. So it is not changing. So for example, 0, 1, 2, 3, but after 3, if you keep on clicking, it remains 3 only. So if you see this scenario, then here also we have used pure component only, right? So what is going to happen if you refresh, and then first time definitely it will re-render. It will render, in fact, and after that the re-rendering will depend on whether it is changing, whether some state or prop is changing or not. Okay, so now let's see. 0 becomes 1, so it's, you see that it has re-rendered. 1 becomes 2, so you see it has re-rendered. 2 becomes 3, it has re-rendered, and now 3 remains 3. So even if set state is being called, but you see re-rendering is not happening. That will not be the case when there is a pure, it is simply pure component, right? So sorry, it is simply React.component. It is not pure component, then this feature will not be available. You see that whether it is remaining 3, then also it is re-rendering. You see it is a 3, again 3, but then also it keeps on re-rendering. So this is the advantage which we get from pure component. Now there are a couple of more scenarios where React.PureComponent re-renders apart from change in state and prop. So there's no just hard and fast rule that only these state and prop will change, then only it will render. In fact, we have earlier seen that there is something called context in React, right? If there is some context in React, and let's say inside this component you are consuming that context, so there's some React context consumer is there, right? Then even if that context changes, then also the React component will re-render, even if that is a pure component. Apart from there is one more scenario that let's say this component is wrapped outside this another component, and this whole component is greeting, right? Then in that case, if this whole greeting component, if it is being used somewhere, so in this case you see that this greeting component is being used here. So if this component is like removed and inserted again, so if this component re-renders, then automatically its child, which is my div, will also re-render even if it is a pure component. So these are some corner cases, but in general, and those are like expected cases, right? So those are things which I said, that context changes, re-rendering in case of context, and re-rendering when the parent component is when parent component is mounting again, remounting. Then in those cases, it is obvious that it should definitely re-render, right? But and that's why that is just a corner case, which is not a big deal, right? The big deal is the main difference is around states and props. If states and props are same, then they are not going to re-render. Pure component is not going to re-render. It is going to re-render only when there is a difference in state and props. Now you might think that if React.PureComponent is so good that it is like optimized version. Whenever there is a change in state and prop, then only it re-renders, right? And my UI is always a function of some state and some prop, some state and some prop. It is always a function. UI will be always a function of that only, which means that if there is no change, then why should I even bother re-rendering? Okay, so why we should not always use React.PureComponent? What is the point of using React.Component? We should always use React.PureComponent, right? No, it's not that simple. You see, the problem is that this React.PureComponent does not see the exact difference that whenever there is a change. In fact, it does a particular type of change detection that is called shallow comparison. Okay, which means that let's say this count is there, and then after that, let's say there is something else. Let's say my list is there. Okay, then my list is starting from empty array. Okay, and then let's say instead of changing count, I do something like this, where I do something like my list dot means sorry, it should be this dot state dot my list dot push, and then let's say I push count. Just this let's say I'm pushing this dot state dot count. Okay, now you see, and let's have a separate handler for this. So let's say click 1, click 2, click 1, and let's have a separate handler. So click 1 and 2. Okay, and let's duplicate this. It will be 2, and let's keep it for that, and this 2 will be specifically for what I'm talking about right now. Okay, so so it is something like this, that click 1 is changing that thing, this state variable, which is count, and click 2 is also being handled here, but I'm not using this this dot state dot my list. So let's have some way of showing this. So let's say something like colon, and then again I do something like JSON dot stringify. So I'm just stringifying, because generally in JSX you cannot directly print objects. Okay, so I'm converting that to string and then printing it. Okay, so you can see that right now it is empty string. 1, 2 I do, and then if I click, then you see that I'm changing I'm changing this thing. I'm changing this dot state dot my list. But the problem is that even if I have changed it, but then it has not re-rendered, because this dot set state has not been called. Okay, so firstly do one thing. Firstly make it simple component. I'll get back to pure component, and then let's do something like this, and that let's create a okay, so let's do something like this, that my list dot push. Okay, so let's have something like this. Just for simplicity I'm doing, but you may not use a separate variable, but I'm just using a separate variable for the sake of it. So essentially what I'm doing is that I'm taking a variable, I'm pushing it, and then I'm setting this dot set state. So what am I doing? I am whatever is the this dot state dot my list. In that I am pushing whatever is the current count, and then I am doing set state. Now if you see, it is a not a pure component. It is a normal component. Now if you see that if I click, then you see that this becomes 0. Okay, if I click again, then it becomes 0. So whatever is the current count, that is being inserted. If I change it to, let's say, whatever 3, then after that if I insert, then 3 is inserted. So in that fashion, whatever is the current count, that is inserted. Okay, so this is how it is. Now let's do one thing. Let's change this to pure component, and now let's see what happens. So you see it is 0, and I make it 1. Okay, and then I click. Then if I click, then it should insert, right? Why it is not inserting? And that is the problem. That is the problem with pure component. So that's why pure component, if you use, then you have to use it with care. You have to use it with care, because it just does not you cannot be blindly like reliant on this, that whenever my state will change, then it will. Right now you can clearly see that my state is changing. Okay, in fact, if you do something like this, that you click, then you see that this thing has already was being inserted. You saw? So 0 is there. Let's say I clicked, then actually it became 0. 0 is inserted. I clicked again, then 2 times 0 is inserted. But when I do this, then you see that when I change this to 1, then that earlier 0 0 which was inserted is there. Now if I, let's say I click again, then 1 is inserted, but it is not re-rendered, and that's why it is not visible. Internally this array is 0 0 1, but right now I cannot see it because the re-rendering has not happened. And when I again change this 1 to 2, then since the component has re-rendered, so it has taken the latest latest this dot state dot my list, right? And latest state dot my list was 0 0 1, and that's why you can see the latest value. But as a result of just clicking on this thing is not updated in real time, and that is because even if you're doing this dot set state, but this variable is actually same as the old variable. You see why? Because state dot my list, that base address is same, even if that this we discussed in arrays also, right? That any array's base address is same even if you keep on pushing something. So we are pushing in something and these things are changing, but the base address is same, and that's why it is not re-rendered. And why it is not re-rendered when base address is same? Because it is pure component. What pure component does is that it does a shallow comparison, and the shallow comparison meaning is that the first level values, so count, my list, it will on the face of it, it will see that those values should change. If it is primitive, then just by value it will see. If it is non-primitive data like arrays or objects, then by base address, base memory address it will see. So you see that base memory address is same even if I am pushing, and that's why this thing is not updated in real time. Had this been normal component, okay, then you can see that it is updated in real time. Okay, you can see that it is updated in real time. So that's what the point is, that and that's why this sort of thing is not the default. Means in fact the same behavior is in at other places also, right? So the point is that generally everywhere by default you will use React.component rather than pure component, because then if you don't understand that what is the shape of your data, what is the nesting structure of your data, if these things are not understood, then React cannot take care of you, right? And that's why by default you should always use React.component. But if you are pretty much aware of your data structure, that how the data you are using, and you want to optimize, and you know that I know that how it is working, you understand that intricacies, then in order to optimize that on your own risk rather I should say, whatever, if you understand it properly, then you can use definitely pure component. So it definitely makes the thing faster, but that fast thing comes at the price of understanding that what is the shape of your data. If your data is like not some array or something, and even if it is array, you don't want to update it or something, so then in those cases definitely you can go with pure component. But React on its own doesn't know that what is the shape of the data. Only the developer knows, right? So only the developer can decide that whether I have to use pure component or normal component. Now you might be thinking that why does pure component do shallow comparison? Why it doesn't do deep comparison? The reason is that deep comparison is too much costly. So for example, let's say here some prop ABC is there, and then let's say it is like too many levels deep. So you can understand that it can be like tens of levels of deep. So if React will go on and keep on comparing like 10 levels deep, 20 levels deep, then on each render, if this much computation is done, then there can be like performance hit, right? So they don't want to do that. So they have provided only two ways. One one is that normal component where whether it is changing or not changing every time you do something like this dot set state or something, every time it will re-render. And there is something called pure component where if you understand how is your data structure, then you can better optimize it. The developer can it's himself or herself better optimize it by using pure component if he or she is aware of the data structure. Okay, now the problem is that maybe that I want to use pure component, and at most of the places, let's say it's working fine. So for example, right now I'm using pure component, and whenever I'm changing Alex to Bob, then it is rendering. When I'm clicking again, then Bob to Bob, it is not re-rendering. Again, Bob to Charlie, it is rendering. Again, 0 to 1, it is rendering. But let's say I click this, then it is not rendering. But then if I change 1 to 2, then it is re-rendering. Okay, but then again if I click, then it is not rendering unless I do a next re-render. So the problem, you understand that everything else is working fine, only with my list there is a problem. Then what you can do is that yeah, you can definitely convert it to component, and then it will keep on working, it will keep on re-rendering every time. But you can still take advantage of pure component by doing something like that in rest of the cases it's fine, it's working fine. Where there is a problem, then you can do something like force update. We know that we in one of the earlier videos we learned about force update. So here you are saying that you know what, my base address is same, I know that, but still I would like you to go ahead and force update it, because it is pure component and you will do shallow comparison, and that's why React will not go ahead and re-render it. But I am saying React specifically that please re-render. Okay, so that's what is happening, and that's why even if it is pure component, then also you'll see that now it is working fine. So yeah, now in this manner we have taken like advantage of sort of best of both worlds, isn't it? So yeah, that will be all for pure component. We'll see that we can do a slightly more granular control using something called should component update lifecycle method. And in the meantime, if you are not aware of shallow comparison and deep comparison, then you can go ahead, and there is already a video on that shallow comparison and deep comparison, and you can revise that. Okay, so that will be all for pure component. See you in the next one.